Hey y'all, I'm Dan Hamilton, host of the Next Gen Warrior Show, live here in Austin, Texas, as always at Studio 8. I have the great opportunity of sitting down with Steph Drake from NextOP. Steph, thank you for joining us all the way from Houston. And before we get started, can you tell our audience a little bit about your military history and what you're doing now with NextOP and how y'all are providing some really great services for veterans transitioning out of the military?
Yeah, Dan, thanks for having me. I'd love to. I graduated from the Naval Academy in 2005 and commissioned a Marine and spent 8 years in the active duty Marine side as a logistics officer. Had all sorts of incredible jobs and worked with some pretty awesome Marines during that time. Transitioned out of the active duty side in 2013, and both my husband and I, also a Marine, moved to Houston, Texas, the home of oil and gas in the U.S. And I joined a major oil and gas company, Shell, and did a lot of different logistics and supply chain roles in Shell for about 6 or 7 years. Including some operations management type roles and touching a couple different classes of business before the great opportunity to join NextOP as the executive director came up, and I couldn't say no. So as of August 2019, here I am with NextOP. It's an incredible organization focused on employment for our talented middle enlisted veterans. So E4 to E7, maybe first or second term, transitioning out and looking for a career, not just a job. Our staff takes great care to work on everything from resumes and interview prep, and even making our core group aware of the different types of roles that they are a good fit for that may not be obvious when coming out of the military.
It's a really incredible opportunity that you guys are providing veterans, and obviously something that's very needed for the veterans population as they leave the military and move into a civilian career. You know, I always like to ask our guests and talk to our guests about their transition out of the service. But what's interesting to me about yours is you left the military and essentially moved into a job in the oil and gas industry that was fairly similar to what you did in the service. Can you talk about the difference between what it's like to do that for a veteran versus what it's like maybe for a veteran to really have a totally different career trajectory after they leave the military?
Yeah, absolutely. So correct. I transitioned out as a logistician, right, and moved into supply chain in oil and gas. Although I credit to Shell, I had zero experience in contracting and procurement, which was my first job in Shell.
Right.
So that took a risk right there.
Interesting.
But it's not always the case. If you think of our combined arms MOSs across the service, or even the more unusual maintenance MOSs that don't directly translate into a civilian word. So logistics is the same civilian word as it is in the corporate side, right?
Right.
But infantry and artillery don't necessarily scream project management or small unit leadership or field operation to a private company, especially maybe at that hiring manager level or HR and recruiting. So that's one of the biggest things. It's really fun to watch our team when they're talking with one of our candidates. And the number of times I hear the conversation, okay, so you want to be in security, can you tell me why? And inevitably someone on the other end of the line is saying, well, I'm a grunt, or I'm an artilleryman. And then my team has, the opportunity to share, well, have you thought about field operations in oil and gas, or have you thought about maintenance operations in manufacturing and industry? Because all of those things are easily translatable and attainable when we get the right company talking with the right candidates.
How has your perception of veteran transition changed since you have now been working with NextOP, but that you've just experienced it for yourself?
Yeah, so I think it's really interesting to just reflect on a couple of different lenses. One is just how the Department of Defense and the Department of Labor and the services themselves are starting to look at transition as not just something that has to happen because we have to move folks along, but something that we can do well, right, as a service. And then it speaks to the credibility of our service on the outside. And hopefully we're selling the Air Force, the Army, the Marine Corps, all of our services because some phenomenal candidate has transitioned well and is very quickly making a mark in their new company. right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's one change that I think is nice to see, and stems a little bit from them saying, a year out, we want all of our soldiers, our sailors, our airmen, our Marines to go to transition seminars, not
Mm-hmm.
your last 2 weeks anymore, right? But a
Yeah,
year out.
yeah.
Working on both civilian corporate style resumes and federal resumes, not just assuming everyone's maybe going into the federal space. So there have been some good changes, I think, just in the 5 or 6 years since I experienced transition. And then I think if you look at it from the lens of different ranks, right, and different experiences in the service, there's some different opportunities and things to be aware of there. As an officer, I had a degree, right,
Mm-hmm.
when I got out.
Right.
There were for-profit programs, headhunting style programs that were easily accessible to me. I had fit reps, right?
Yeah.
And so I had resume bullets written down. I hadn't pulled them all into a resume, but it wasn't that hard to do. After 8 years, just pull out all my fit reps, line them up on the floor,
Right.
and start piecing things together. And those are a couple of key things that this population that we serve doesn't necessarily have at their disposal. So trying to help bridge the gap that way for them.
Yeah.
Then the last piece of it is just the corporate appetite, right? So from a corporation standpoint, it's a little less risky to take on someone with a degree. It's not that different than hiring someone straight out of college, maybe. Or maybe the skill set translates a little bit easier because there's a title of leader and a team of 35 or something like that. But if you look at our enlisted, they're doing the same things. It's just us making sure that we're helping them write it down in a way and share it through their resume in a way that someone can reflect on and within that context see that individual in their company.
So you guys, I want to clarify this for the audience as well. You guys are working with veterans who not only have just left the military, but if you're a veteran, you decided to take advantage of the GI Bill and you've gone through school, you're also helping them get into the workforce. Is that correct as well? Or are you guys mostly focused on maybe the first 6 months to a year after somebody leaves the service?
It's a great question. The predominance of our candidates are the first 6 months to a year after folks have left the service. To qualify for our programs, it's pretty simple. It's post 9/11, right? Middle enlisted are the big buckets, and then be employable, which means everything from have a drug screen to have a driver's license and things like that.
Right.
Those are the big buckets that we start off with, and that's all it takes to fill out our initial intake. We do have candidates that maybe connect with us while they're in school, and we love helping them as well, right? They've got that recent middle enlisted leadership under their belt, tag teaming that with a fresh degree, which is actually different than an officer, right? That degree is older from an officer perspective than someone who gets out, uses their GI Bill, and goes to school. So we have a pretty good track record, especially with engineers. So in oil and gas in the Houston area.
So are you guys having quite a bit of success then reaching candidates who are in the service? I mean, that may be actually what you're focused on, is finding men and women in the armed forces who are going through the transition program while they're still in the military. Has that kind of been the key, or maybe something that's been fixed in the transition process out of the military?
Yeah, so exactly. We've had a lot of success just in the past year with bringing companies out with us to bases where we've established relationships with some of those folks running the transition arenas. And we've even had some companies that have conducted interviews out on the spot and made conditional offers 3-4 months out. So now we're completely closing that gap on any unemployment time post transition. And that's one of the best practices that we share with many of the companies that we work with as far as a goal to get toward, especially with the timeline moving out.
I'm interested though, I think back on my time being in the Marine Corps, and I did 4 years, and I'm interested to know if your experience and the experience of the folks in the armed services that you're meeting. I feel like when I was 21 or 22, I necessarily didn't know what I wanted to do while I was in the armed forces, because I was so focused on what I was doing day to day. Is there a way that you can talk to men and women in the armed forces, and did you know what you wanted to do before you got out, and how did you kind of sift through that?
Also a great question. So I didn't know either what I wanted to do when I got out, but I think knew what I wanted to do in certain contexts, right? So I knew I loved leading a team. Mm-hmm. So that was important to have that either immediate opportunity or know that it was close behind a role. I knew that I wanted to do something that was dynamic, right? And maybe something that was kind of close to touching the action. So not just sitting behind a desk answering phone calls all day, right?
Right.
So knowing those things even really helps people help you as a veteran figure out, okay, I know your left and right parameters. How do I help narrow that down? What those opportunities or companies might look like?
Right.
And one of the reasons I chose Shell out of the different offers that I was lucky to get was because I knew that was a huge company and I didn't have to make my mind up on what I wanted to be when I grew up right away. Right.
That's actually an interesting point, because I think a lot of veterans, when they leave the service, especially maybe when you talk with them, it feels like a monumental decision. So it's almost like they're making a decision that is going to determine the rest of their life. But when you get on base, you're actually telling them, hey, get your foot in the door. This isn't going to, it does have a long-term impact, but almost to tell them to relax about the decision a little bit, that like, hey, you have a while to work through this and figure this out.
Yeah, exactly. And there's benefit to picking the right company to start your career with and get exposure. And that company may be the right company for you forever, or it may be the right place to start, right? And that's pretty common regardless of whether someone's a veteran or not. But you're right, veterans, we have that, okay, I signed the dotted line and I did this job and this was it for, however many years. And so recognizing that it's a little different in the outside world is
right
too.
Especially if you're serving middle enlisted to senior enlisted personnel who have been working at a job within a certain mindset. And we talk a lot about the social parameters in the military and the social customs in the military. Just the mindset and the way that you think, the life and death aspects of being in the military, and how different that transition is. So I would guess that when you are talking to these veterans, you're not only working on structurally providing them resume help, but you're also working on a mindset and almost a transition of social settings and ideas of what their life is going to be like after the military.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, we're their lens, right? We're the opportunity to see that. And what's one of the neat things about our team is that most of us have transitioned out of the military into corporate America in some way, shape, or form, and then landed back at NextOP. So we all have that experience as well. But yeah, spot on. And the other piece of that is actually the corporate side of it, right? So corporations will sometimes see military talent and, oh, great, I would love to get a bunch of semi drivers, right? Or I would love to get MOS, and they get fixated on it. But we like to remind them that most of our candidates and most of our veterans didn't select their profession in the military.
Yeah, I think that's such an interesting, almost juxtaposition that I think maybe companies look to find somebody who did something similar in the military, but even this show right here, I was a security force Marine, I was enlisted, and I had no background in terms of communications, public relations, broadcasting. It really does, I think, happen to a lot of veterans that sometimes the companies are looking for them to do what they did in the military, but somebody who's in the armed forces may be looking to do something or just have an interest that they haven't been able to enjoy while they were in the military because they're so focused on their military service.
I mean, you could find a finance, let's say airman, right?
Yeah.
Who love tinkering with their car on the weekends. And that's a great person to be a mechanic, right? But that doesn't come out in any of the resume and the MOS conversation. So it's one of the reasons I caution a little bit with MOS translators. It's limiting. So it's a great place to start maybe to just get an idea of what's a direct one-for-one. But from both a company perspective and a veteran perspective, there's a lot more opportunity out there. Yeah. And, our organization is one of the ones that can help identify those and translate what else may be something you hadn't considered. So
I would like to change the conversation from the veterans and those in the armed forces and ask you about your role as the executive director. Obviously, going from the military and then working in a large corporation and then being the executive director of NextOP Veterans is an interesting progression. And so I wanted to know how your perspective maybe on leadership has changed now that you're an executive director.
Oh, okay. I like this. So honestly, not a lot, right? And even between the Marine Corps and oil and gas, I don't think my personality and my leadership approach changed much. I think, you have maybe different sets of stakeholders and different tools, and HR is a little bit different and things like that. But for the most part, I think I'm largely, a product of what's molded me year on year from a leadership perspective. And everywhere I go, I'm always looking for the right one or two people to be good mentors and be there for tough questions when I have them or I want to bounce ideas off of. And the team from an NextOP perspective, and my time at Shell as well, I've been great. I've had great teams, so it's a lot of fun. The biggest change, I think, is that Shell's a big hierarchical company, right?
Yeah.
And so being in somewhere in the middle, my goals were not necessarily always my own because, of course, they had to tie to a higher organizational goals. Same with the Marine Corps.
Sure.
And so being executive director, I do have the board of directors from a guidance and an approval standpoint. But other than that, our small team really gets to chart the path of our organization and where we think we want to go and how we think we want to do it. So facilitating that with the team, I think, has been a really fun leadership opportunity.
Yeah, we had an interesting conversation before we got on camera just about where you're looking to take the organization and some great partnerships that you guys are really going to expand on in 2020. Tell me what you are most optimistic about for the organization in the coming year.
Yeah, okay. So we talked a little bit about it or alluded to it, but our base presence, right, is a big one. So meeting our talent where they're at, and also that next step of bringing our corporate partners with us. So we've done it a little bit this year. It was hugely successful. So leveraging those success opportunities to convince both our corporate partners to come do it. It's worth it, right? And then to be there for these transitioning veterans who are starting this process much earlier, which is great. But we want to make sure that we're able to help and not wait for them to get to our community.
Absolutely.
Before we're helping,
and,
right?
And you guys are based in Houston, and you also have a relationship with a lot of the companies that are around there too. Is that correct?
We do. So we have a relationship with a lot of the companies based in and around Houston and the greater Texas area. And then some companies that you might not think of that we work with from a partnership standpoint. So for example, the Houston Texans have been wonderful. We're partnering with them this year to bring a programming series of events to the Houston area for both employers, veteran candidates, educating folks on the opportunities for veterans in industry and the opportunities for, from the energy company standpoint, the opportunity that veterans are, right? From a talent pool source, because Houston has an aging workforce in the craft workspace, as does much of the manufacturing industry. So up and coming opportunity, and we want to make sure that people know how to tap into it.
Well, that's a really cool opportunity to be able to work with the Texans. Tell me more about that relationship and kind of what brought that you guys and them together.
Sure. So the relationship is actually part of a larger, we'll call it collaborative competition between Walking with the Wounded, which is a UK-based organization with a similar mission to ours, and us. So the challenge is for our respective corporate partners and hopefully prospective corporate partners that will engage through this forum to collectively hire 300 veterans into the energy industry in 2020. And the Houston Texans have been wonderful as a platform for helping us share the news. So we kicked it off in November. We had a press conference in London at the game that they had in the UK against the Jaguars. So yeah, and the Walking with the Wounded was there as well. So we announced it there, and then we've really started this year, and we've got a series of programming events that will hold some of them at NRG Stadium. So we have a really unique opportunity to bring in both companies and employers in different settings with different purposes for workshops. And then they're wonderful. So they've also, they're looking forward to sharing some of their tips on public speaking and making an introduction and those kinds of things as well for our veteran candidates.
That's awesome. I'm interested to know about the perspective you gained by being in the UK. Is the organization Walking with the Wounded and our friends across the pond, are they dealing with similar transition issues within their veterans population?
They are. So one of the reasons the relationship came about was actually my predecessor had linked up with his equivalent in Walking with the Wounded maybe a year or two ago, and they were sharing kind of the same stories, right? Yeah. And so it's a good opportunity to make, especially companies that, in the Texas area, we've got quite a few global companies that have a presence in both places, yeah. Aware. And in some places, interestingly enough, we may have one company that we have a great relationship that maybe isn't doing the same thing over in the UK yet, and vice versa. So it's a good opportunity to even connect companies to themselves, right? Yeah.
Can you talk about, I keep coming back to the concept about how much different transition for somebody who, like myself, who did 4 or 5 years and then got out, and then a middle or senior enlisted person who's dedicated a large majority or maybe even half of their life, 15 to 20 years if they joined at 18, and then leave the service. What are some of the maybe the social challenges that they're facing that you try to prepare them for? My kind of thesis about veterans after leaving the military and then joining the workforce in their communities across the country is that we are specially equipped for things, but then there are also some weak points, maybe trying to understand company culture, or maybe some of the soft skills, that we have a tremendous amount of leadership, perseverance, ability to work in the team. But I think there are some maybe soft skills that are underdeveloped during the military. And I wanted to see if you had noticed that in the oil and gas industry and how those veterans have overcome that transition issue.
No, I think you're spot on. And it's really person dependent. And sometimes it's even service culture dependent, I think, right? It may depend where you were stationed and how much time you spent doing certain activities or presenting to people that you didn't know versus really close-knit time in your unit, for example. And I think a lot of it, to your point, has to do with finding that new community relatively quickly and having someone that you can ask those dumb questions to, right? Because it is different. I mean, I still remember the first couple of weeks in the corporate world, like not standing up every time, my boss came in the room.
Yeah, the leader comes in, right?
And that seemed dumb, but it was absolutely like a conscious effort not to stand up for a couple of weeks until it became common practice. So little things that and had I not adapted, right? Or if someone doesn't adapt in that situation, then they may be viewed as rigid or overly militaristic. So how do we prep people for that? And the biggest way is just to sync them up with someone in their company, right? Yeah. So the companies that do it well have a veteran resource group. I mean, I still remember the first day I showed up at our Deer Park plant. Yeah. There was a Marine who probably graduated about 6 years ahead of me at Navy, and he sent me a note and said, "See you in my office at 3." Right? I'm like, okay. So
I'll be there.
I managed to connect with someone on my first day in a new city, in a new company. So when things like that can happen intentionally, that's the best way to start that ball rolling of that assimilation. But it's the ones that it doesn't happen for intentionally that I probably worry about the most. Yeah. And so that's where our team does try and coach, right? And make sure folks are in an interview, relax, be yourself, right? It's not left hand, left knee, right hand, right knee. Yeah. And recognize your audience. So it's an interesting, topic, but one of my takeaways after being a reservist now and on this side of the fence, both in the corporate world and in this executive director NextOP space, is I would love to interject more organic interviewing opportunities
Yeah.
into our time in the service, because I think it would help people, it'd be a more natural activity for them versus a very rigid moment.
Right. As we're having this conversation, there's so many things that keep coming up in my mind that I would like to address and talk about. And the first one is maybe the onus is on, veterans inside of the organization going to find recently discharged soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, etc., in making sure that they can learn the culture. Like one of the things that I found that I was looking for when I got to a new office was where was I going to go get lunch? Little things like that where you're like, it's trivial, but it prevents you almost from gaining confidence in when you're swimming in a new pond if you don't know the simplest of things.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember I was told the first day of work, make sure I wore business attire that was appropriate for a manufacturing plant. I was like,
yeah.
Okay. So just little things to your point about just the workplace, different things to expect and who to reach out to. And I like your challenge that it's on those of us that are already out here to go find those that are in need. And then the other thing I'd offer is if you're in a small company, you're new, you're the only veteran, or you're the only one you know about, right?
Yeah.
Then find some other arena in the community. So Houston has Combined Arms, for example, with different opportunities for that. But like you could just go work out a couple times a week with a group of veterans, and that way you have a kind of a sounding board. But building your community piece by piece doesn't happen overnight, like it does when you show up at a new base.
I want two more things before we close out here. I want to talk to you about veteran underemployment, an issue that was raised in a veteran opportunity report by LinkedIn, and I was gonna hold this up here for the camera if you all at home can see this. Before I get to that, we've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of female veterans and leaders in the veterans community, and I just wanted to give you an opportunity to maybe speak to female veterans or women who are in the armed services today. I think some of the veteran trans issues for women are a little bit different than they are for the men that are getting out. If there's a piece of advice that you could either provide companies who are in the oil and gas industry who are looking to hire women, or for women who are in the armed forces and looking to get out, you're obviously a great example of what it takes to transition and how to do it successfully. Can you speak to maybe that community a little bit and some of the challenges that they might be expecting when they get out so that it's not a shock to them?
Yeah, so I mean, I think female veterans, we're already a small group, and then in some services we get even smaller, right?
Yeah.
And so being small, though, I think I've gotten in a much better place from the time I saw in the beginning of my military time to now, where we're pretty supportive of one another as that small group. And if from a corporate perspective, you're looking for that female leadership talent that's already grown, female veterans are a perfect opportunity, right? Because even our young enlisted have led a fire team or a squad, right? Or been a platoon sergeant maybe. So they have leadership skills and experience, right? And a dynamic environment, not necessarily just in an office space. So that's one specific opportunity. I think I know companies are often looking for female talent, but here's a kind of a way to get a 2-for-1. The third thing I'll offer is the Department of Defense in general is extremely diverse, right? You have representatives from all 50 states. And I think about diversity in terms of outward diversity, but also in terms of where you grew up, right? How you speak, and even service cultures impact our diversity that way. So when you look at hiring a veteran, you're actually, and you want to add female veteran to that too. So imagine you're hiring a female veteran, you've actually got diversity 3 ways.
Right.
You've got female, you've got a veteran, and then you have their diversity of thought or behavior or skills of how they grew up and what their experiences are, because we come from all over the country.
Yeah, and that's like you said, that's such a tremendous asset for somebody in the oil and gas industry, or really any industry for that matter, to be able to hire a female veteran.
Yeah. And then from a female veteran standpoint, I would say use your resources. And I think we're all trying to figure out the same thing. So it's not something that anyone should be worried about asking for help or seeking whatever resource they may need at the time. It's probably important to recognize that I would venture females probably get out for different reasons than males do.
Okay.
Sometimes they're getting out for the same reason. So everyone's unique in why they're getting out of the service and what they're looking for. And so everyone is kind of welcome to that table of what's available in the corporate space from a job perspective. When I think about NextOP and our corporate partners, but also any of the services that are out there for people leaving, women or men should feel like they're for them.
And the last thing that I want to bring up is this Veteran Opportunity Report. You talked about the leadership qualities, especially small unit leaders and staff NCOs in the military who are getting out have a tremendous amount of that background. And so what they talk about in the Veteran Opportunity Report is that businesses, and I think the veterans community and organizations like yourself have done a great job of placing veterans in jobs, and they talk about the underemployment issue in the veterans community, or maybe in the business community may be a better way to describe that. I wanted to see if that has been your experience as the executive director, if you've seen that in the veterans community, and what you think maybe some remedies are.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. So yes, I mean, I think 6, 7, 8 years ago, we were talking about unemployment in the veteran space, right? And I think we probably had underemployment going on at the same time,
right?
But it was fully overshadowed by the staggering unemployment numbers for veterans. And now that the unemployment is under control, the discussion has rightfully turned to underemployment, because underemployment actually impacts all those same things, right? Quality of life, social and community type transition, and that being a positive experience. Also, capacity for growth and a career. And so, one of companies' biggest fears is retention, right, with veterans, and they may hear, they worry about something like that, which the numbers actually tell you it's pretty on par for if you look at it generationally, instead of veteran versus non-veteran. But retention sometimes means them getting placed into the right job to begin with, or if it's a preparatory job to get them the skills and experience they need to be successful in what would be that kind of next step move, where they wouldn't be underemployed. Our company is making the candidate aware of that.
Right.
So if you think about it from a veteran standpoint, when we were in the service, you could look at your entire career path on Google, right?
Yeah.
Here's the different things I can do for the next 20 years. Here's exactly how much I'll get paid. Here's the years I'll be eligible for promotion. Now go to a company and none of that's available online, let alone even outwardly within the company. It's all very individual, and not maybe spoken about as often or as outwardly as it is in the service. So that's one piece of it. Another part of it I'd like to bring into the conversation is veterans and what we think we're qualified for. So I see it both ways. So sometimes we'll see someone says, okay, I've done this, this, and this. I should be, C-suite director of operations, VP of finance, right? And so we may manage expectations one direction. Then we definitely see the opposite, where someone's like, I probably just need to be a security guard. And it's like, hold on, you've led missions in combat. There are things we can do here, that you've done project management, you've done resource planning and allocation, right? So things like that. But along with that, there's all these big picture things that companies, aren't always thinking about. I lost my train of thought on that one.
No, it's okay. I know we were just having I think a great follow-up on veterans who are sometimes overvalue their experience and maybe shoot a little bit too high and then end up kind of being pushed down a rung or two. And then there's veterans who get out who go, well, I was so focused on combat operations for X amount of years that I don't even know how to transition that to the workforce. But I think you guys and your organization are really filling the gap to be able to match those veterans with maybe a career that they can go into in the energy industry, even though that may not be what's exactly on their resume or what they did in the military.
Right, exactly. And again, underemployment's a little bit in the eye of the beholder too, and understanding, and some of it's in asking. So when was the last time Lance Corporal went and asked his lieutenant for a promotion? Probably never.
Doesn't happen, right?
Because it's not an option.
Yeah.
So, getting to the corporate world and realizing that, sometimes you have to have a discussion with your line manager, like, how do I become eligible for promotion? And those are conversations that we don't have in the military, and it feels really unnatural when you get to the civilian world for a lot of us.
Yeah.
And even as simple as applying for jobs, but also applying for new jobs in the same company. From a veteran perspective, I think we tend to look at requirements as all must-haves. So if you read a job, just pick any job description online. It's going to say, we'd love for this person to have an MBA. If they could have hung the moon, that would be great.
Yeah.
Speak 7 languages.
Yeah.
And then it'll say, X, Y, and Z, right? And Z may even be something that could be learned in 30 days, like SAP or something. So a veteran will look at that and they'll say, well, I haven't hung the moon. I only speak 6 languages, not 7. And I don't know SAP, but I know the Air Force's, procurement system. So I'm not qualified for this job. So on both counts, both the veteran and the company have sort of disqualified themselves from connecting, right?
Yeah.
And probably unintentionally, right? So that's one of the things we work with companies on, is making sure their job descriptions aren't shutting out that candidate pool entirely, right? Yeah. And then same with the veteran, because people will put in job descriptions 10 things, and some of those things may be table stakes, but probably not all. And the average civilian counterpart, especially men, apparently, will say, "Oh, I have 6 of 10. I'm applying.
I'm great." Yeah.
Right. But we're not made like that, right? Yeah. You don't go tell your staff sergeant you're ready to go to the meritorious, corporal board if you only meet half the qualifications.
Interesting. I never thought about it in that sort of context, but when you frame it like that, you go, oh yeah, now that is the learned behavior that is then transitioning into essentially the workforce.
Right. Yeah.
Before we close this out, I want to thank you for your time. I want to thank you for your continued leadership and service at NextOP. For folks at home and for our audience, if they want to get connected with you guys and learn more about how to get plugged in to the energy industry, or if they're in the armed forces and they are going to be transitioning out of the military in the coming year or so, how can they get contacted with you all?
Sure. We're on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn, NextOP Vets, and we'd love for you to contact us. It's easy to register with us as well online. We ask a handful of questions, and that's it, to make sure you fit our profile. And we look forward to seeing you at the bases that we visit throughout the year. By all means, stop by and meet our team. They're absolutely wonderful, and they look forward to working with you.
Well, thank you so much again for your time, Steph. And obviously, you're such a great example of continued leadership and service. That is what we love to promote here at Next Gen Warrior. For everyone watching at home, thank you for being a part of this episode. Thank you for continuing to promote veteran success across every industry. Veterans who leave the service have a tremendous amount of perseverance, leadership experience, and the ability to work in teams. If you continue to connect with groups like NextOP, they will put you in a position to succeed. From all of us here at the Next Gen Warrior program, thank you for watching. On behalf of Chairman George P. Bush and the Veterans Land Board, we will see you next time.
Follow us on Instagram at Voices of Vets, on Twitter at Voice of Veterans, and on Facebook at facebook.com/Voices of Veterans. To hear more, please visit voicesofveterans.org. Join us in sharing the success stories of Texas veterans. Thank you for joining us for the Next Gen Warrior podcast.